Hello everyone and welcome back to RetroB8. In today's episode we're going to be looking at the C64 Collection 3 for the Evercade, and is it any good or not? Well, let's find out. But before we have a look at the Commodore 64 Collection 3 for the Evercade trailer, there's just about enough time for a shameless plug for a stream that myself and OSG have coming up very soon. I'll hand you over to the Games Master himself to tell you all about it.
Hello and welcome along one and all to a new channel and a new stream from your favourite two Pauls from Sunderland called RetroLibrium. Each episode, OSG and RetroB8 will be focusing on 8 and 16-bit micros with a different special guest, a quiz, live gameplay challenges, new indie game development, and of course, I shall be reopening the consultation zone for all you pesky cheaters. Coming soon to our new YouTube and Twitch channel, the link in the description. Rediscovering the past, shaping the future. Welcome to RetroLibrium.
Thank you, Games Master. But back to the video and let's have a look at the 13 games that are on their official advert. So we have 13 incredibly varied games, so let's make a start with Summer Games 2. Summer Games 2 was released in 1985 and published by Epix. When it was reviewed in September's edition of TheC64, it received a gold medal award and it got 97%. And to be fair, they weren't wrong either, because this is simply classed as probably the best sports simulation game on the Commodore 64, so this really gets us off to a solid start with the Evercade Collection 3. And the absolute classics don't stop there, because next up we've got Boulder Dash, which was published by First Star Software in 1984. Now bizarrely, this is one of a few games in this collection that wasn't reviewed by TheC64 back in the day. However, what they did miss out on is an absolute class game. This is really great fun. The game is challenging and requires some sort of strategic thinking as well. It's a gem of a game, it's got unique gameplay, challenging puzzles and definitely repeatability. Next up, we've got Anarchy, which was published by Racket in 1987. Now, Anarchy was originally released as a budget game, but don't let that put you off because Hewson have such a good knack of being able to put out fantastic games for the lowest prices. Anarchy takes the form of a maze puzzle blasting game, where each of the labyrinth pathways of each warehouse has to be negotiated in order to find and destroy each case. It's got unusual gameplay but decent graphics and brilliant sound effects, and this makes Anarchy an interesting and entertaining game to play. So I think so far we've had a really good start. However, that's about to come to an end because the next game is Breakdance, and let's be honest, it ain't great. So let's start off with the good news, and that is that there's 4 different mini-games within this game. However, the bad news is 3 of them are absolutely terrible and only one of them's any good. The graphics are not brilliant, the sound's even worse, and just do yourself a favour, move on to the next game. Next up we've got Cyberdyne Warrior, which is one game that I would class as a bit of a hidden gem. It was released in 1989 by Hewson. Cyberdyne Warrior is a game that I covered in a recent Wonders episode 1989. In that episode I did mention that it was extremely polished, playable fun even by today's standards, and the only downside was sometimes there was a questionable level design, where you'd often fall from the screen into a large barrage of death. With the original release of this game being incredibly difficult to find, this could be a great way of being able to play an awesome hidden gem on the Commodore 64. Now that is the Commodore 64 C chip at its best. This is Cybernoid II: The Revenge, released in 1988 by Hewson. Before I say anything else, I've got to mention firstly that this is an incredibly tough game. This game had some big boots to fill, and it really did do a good job. The only drawback, again, as I've said, is the difficulty, and it does put a lot of people off. Deliverance Stormlord II is yet another game that's published by Hewson. It was released in 1990. First of all, let's talk about the graphics. The large, impressive sprites move well across a nicely detailed and smoothly scrolling landscape. The sound, well, you've got a choice of good sound effects or the excellent Maniacs of Noise soundtracks. Initially, the learning curve is a little bit difficult, so it can be frustrating at first, but with 6 extremely varied levels, there's a definite tough but rewarding challenge ahead. Next up, we've got Exolon, which was released in 1987 and published by Hewson. I discovered Exolon quite recently really, and not even on the Commodore 64. It was a Spectrum version that I played first, and I really do enjoy it. So how does it compare on the Commodore 64? Well, it's not bad. It's not great, but it's not a bad game. Exolon is fun at times, but it really is difficult, and there's a lot of unfair situations and random traps that are going to take you out left, right and centre. It's definitely worth a blast, and you never know, it could be the perfect game for you. Heavy Metal Paradroid, released by, yep, you've guessed it, Hewson again, was released in 1989 and coded by Andrew Braybrook. Of course, he was the man who was behind Uridium, one of the best games on the Commodore 64. This game reviewed incredibly well in 1989, with Zap giving it an overall 97%. It's a revisit of the original Paradroid. This one was released by Racket, costing only $2.99, which was an absolute steal for the game of this quality. It has beautiful graphics, but it's the smooth scrolling that really caught my eye. It might be a little difficult to get into at first, but once you get the hang of things, the action will keep you hooked for weeks. Continuing on with the street sports theme that the Commodore 64 cartridges for the Evercade have had so far, we now have Street Sports Soccer, which was published by Epix and released in 1988. I think with Epix having such a good pedigree when it comes to sporting games, if I'm being honest, this was a little bit of a letdown when I first played it. That's not to say that this one is a bad game, it's not unplayable or anything like that, I just didn't really have fun playing it, and the pitch just seems far too big. However, like a lot of average games, the 2-player mode can save this game. It's one of those where you just have to try and beat your friends. Next up, we have another Hewson release. This one is called Netherworld, which was released in 1988. Graphically, this game looks absolutely fantastic, it really is, and it's really well made too. However, it's just not a game that I found very exciting. I think the best way to describe this game is like a puzzle shooter. But the good points are, it's very responsive controls, and yeah, it's really colourful and it is a good looking game. The game should take you a while to complete as well, with 12 diverse different levels, and as you can hear in the background, it does have some awesome title music. Now we move on to our penultimate game, which is Super Cycle. That was released in 1986 and published by Epix. This game definitely takes a lot of inspiration from Hang On, but as you can see, the graphics are simple, but wow, it really feels like it moves fast. One of the downsides of this game is definitely the engine noise. It really does drone on me after quite a while. There's 10 racetracks to keep you interested, and there's also 3 skill levels. However, and I don't say this very often, I think even on the hardest level, it is still quite easy. And finally, we've made it to game 13, which is Jumpman Junior, published by Epix, and it was quite an early release this, released in 1983. Obviously, this one is the sequel, and it's good, but I wouldn't say it's as good as the original, mainly down to the fact that it lacks the level select from the original, and that's probably its biggest problem. However, this game will still be remembered very fondly by a lot of people, mainly due to the fact of when it was released, and a lot of people, this was the first game that they could have played on their Commodore 64, and nostalgia is a real big thing. So guys, that is all 13 games that we've looked at, and my overall view is, I really genuinely think this is a really good cartridge, and I think it's the best one of the 3 so far. These cartridges are definitely on an upward trajectory. If you are interested in the Commodore 64, the Amiga and other 8-bit micros, then please consider subscribing to my channel for future content. And until next time, goodbye.